Keep
What would you
moving.
do
Get
if
inside,
a ruthless
quickly.
criminal empire
Come on,
came
honey,
for a
hurry.
widow and her little boy, believing no one would stand in their way? What if the only
Get
thing
back!
between them, an
Stay
unthinkable
away
danger,
from my children!
was a battle-scarred Navy SEAL on leave and his fiercely loyal K-9? When Jonas Blackwell landed behind the Ellis home with a gun to Maya's head, the storm outside wasn't the only thing breaking. But in the darkest moment, a single command from Ethan Ward unleashed a miracle that changed everything. If you believe courage still exists in this world, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment to support more stories just like this. Stay with us, because heroes like Ethan and Falcon remind us that light always rises after the storm. A thin veil of fog drifted across Cedar Lake as dusk gathered like a silent warning. Ethan Ward had come to this remote mountain region expecting stillness, hoping the cold bite of early autumn would numb the restless clamor inside his mind. He stood on the wooden deck of the cabin he had rented, a modest structure tucked beneath towering pines, their dark silhouettes jagged against the fading sky. The man's imposing frame filled the fragile quiet of the forest. Ethan Ward, 32 years old, 6'2", shoulders broad from years of punishing training, looked every inch a soldier, even without the uniform. His skin was sun-browned from deployments under relentless desert suns, but his jawline, sharp and angled, held a tension that never seemed to fade. His dark brown hair was trimmed short in the disciplined military style he never managed to abandon, and his steel-gray eyes, once filled with reckless confidence, now carried shadows forged by battles long past. He had served more tours than he cared to count, each one carving into him a deeper groove of vigilance. Most nights, he still jerked awake to the phantom sound of mortars, his chest heaving, his hand reaching instinctively for the rifle that was no longer there. He came to Cedar Lake not because he believed peace was possible, but because he had reached a point where he feared the alternative, the feeling that he was still in a war long after the explosions had stopped. Beside him sat Falcon, the one companion who never asked anything from him except honesty and a command. Falcon was a 4-year-old K-9 with a thick black and tan coat, muscular frame, and deep amber eyes that gleamed with intelligence. A military working dog trained for high-risk operations, Falcon had once tracked insurgents across mountains, survived ambushes, and stood between Ethan and death more than once. Even now, in retirement from active service, Falcon remained hyper-alert, disciplined, and almost unnervingly perceptive. Ethan often wondered if the dog sensed things even he couldn't articulate. The hollowness in his bones, the tension curled at the base of his spine, the constant waiting for something to go wrong. Because for him, something always did. The breeze carried the earthy scent of moss and wet bark, and for a moment, Ethan allowed himself a slow breath. Maybe Cedar Lake could offer him a sliver of calm. Maybe the nights would become quiet again, but Falcon's ear twitched, subtle, sharp, his head lifted slightly, nostrils flaring. Ethan paused. "What is it, buddy?" he murmured under his breath. Falcon didn't answer, but his entire body shifted, muscles tightening beneath his coat, gaze narrowing toward the darkening trees to the east. Ethan followed the dog's stare. Beyond the tree line, partly hidden by vines and undergrowth, stood a small cabin across the slope. He had never met the occupants, but he had seen them a few afternoons ago from a distance. A woman and a little boy. Maya Ellis, he recalled. The locals had mentioned her when he asked about nearby homes. A young widow, they'd said, around 30 years old. Her husband had died 2 years prior, in an accident on the lake, leaving her alone with her 6-year-old son, Noah. Ethan remembered catching a glimpse of her earlier in the week while chopping wood, a slender woman with chestnut brown hair tied loosely behind her skin pale against the crisp air, her movements gentle but tinged with exhaustion. And Noah, small, bright-eyed, endlessly curious, had been running in circles around her, clutching a red toy airplane, laughing as if laughter were something fragile he was desperately trying to protect. Ethan had watched from afar only long enough to ensure they were safe. He wasn't the type to introduce himself. He didn't know how to talk to people anymore. But tonight, something was different. Falcon's low growl rolled like quiet thunder. Ethan narrowed his eyes and stepped closer to the edge of the deck. In the dim light, he noticed movement. Shadows where shadows shouldn't be. 2 figures, maybe 3, shifting near the outskirts of Maya's property. The shapes were faint, blurred by fog and failing daylight, but Ethan's trained instincts recognized the rhythm of predatory observation, the way these figures kept to the blind spots of the cabin. Not hikers, not neighbors. Watching, waiting. A cold prickle spread along his spine. He didn't know Maya Ellis, but he knew the look of surveillance. And whoever those men were, they weren't there on accident. Falcon's growl deepened, the fur along his back rising in a familiar ridge of warning. Ethan felt the same tension inside himself, as natural as breathing. A part of him, an old part, shifted awake. He exhaled, long and slow, trying to calm the surge of readiness that was both instinct and curse. "Easy," he whispered. But the truth was, the dog's reaction only echoed what he already felt. Something dark had seeped into the forest. Something intentional. And something wrong. He watched the silhouettes for several long breaths. They appeared to be scanning the property, perhaps looking for entry points, perhaps charting the movements of those inside. Maya was likely preparing dinner. He could almost imagine her soft humming, unaware of what lurked beyond the tree line. Noah might have been inside playing with his toy airplane, his small hands tracing imaginary skies, blissfully oblivious to danger. Ethan clenched his jaw, a familiar ache settling behind his eyes. This wasn't his problem. That was what he told himself. He had come here to escape conflict, not seek it. But as he watched the faint shadows tilt their heads toward the window of Maya's cabin, as he saw one gesture to another and point toward the back door, Ethan's pulse shifted into a steady, cold beat. Soldiers knew signals when they saw them, and he knew this one far too well. Falcon nudged his leg, a soft but urgent pressure. Ethan swallowed hard. Peace, it seemed, had been a naive hope. The forest around Cedar Lake no longer felt still. It felt like a battlefield waiting to reveal itself. He closed his eyes briefly, hearing echoes from his past. His team caught in an ambush in Helmand Province. Falcon barking sharply before the first explosion hit. The sound of his own voice shouting orders. The sickening weight of realizing he'd lost 2 brothers in the chaos. He had promised himself he wouldn't fail anyone again, especially not people who didn't even know danger was at their door. When Ethan opened his eyes, the fog appeared to have shifted. The silhouettes were gone, or maybe just hidden. The absence was somehow worse. "Let's go inside," Ethan muttered, though he didn't move. He couldn't shake the instinct that this night marked a turning point, that the quiet life he had tried to carve out here was dissolving before it even began. Falcon pressed closer to his side, as if sensing the direction of Ethan's thoughts. The dog's presence steadied him, grounded him. Ethan had survived firefights because of Falcon. The least he could do now was trust the warning Falcon was giving him. He scanned the woods once more, committing every shadow to memory. He didn't know why Maya Ellis was being watched, but he knew without the faintest doubt that if those men returned, and they would, he would be ready, because danger didn't just arrive. It announced itself in silence. The silent woods trembled that night, not from wind or cold, but from a storm that had yet to reveal its face. And Ethan Ward, battle-scarred and unwilling though he was, felt the unmistakable shift of fate tightening its grip around him. The peace he had come searching for slipped through his fingers like mist. Something was coming, and it had already begun. Morning broke with a pale, metallic light that clung to the surface of Cedar Lake like a bruise spreading across still water. The forest seemed quieter than usual, as if the trees themselves had witnessed something in the night they wished not to speak of. Ethan Ward stood at the edge of his deck, mug in hand, the steam rising into the cool air. He hadn't slept, not really. His thoughts had circled endlessly around those shadows near the Ellis cabin, those deliberate movements, the unmistakable posture of men who studied their prey before striking. Beside him, Falcon scanned the tree line with disciplined patience, the thick fur along his back rising only slightly whenever a bird rustled the branches. Ethan looked down at the dog. "You felt it too," he murmured. Falcon blinked, but didn't break his slow, methodical surveillance of the woods. The night had awakened something inside Ethan, the part of him that never truly returned from his service, a part honed by pressure, polished by war, and sharpened by loss. Yet despite the readiness coiled tight in his muscles, he felt something else he hadn't expected: responsibility. He didn't want to be involved in anything beyond the quiet routine he had planned for himself, but the image of those vague figures watching Maya's home had stayed with him like a stain he couldn't scrub from his mind. He'd promised himself never to look away again from people in danger. And this morning, danger felt too close. A soft sound carried across the clearing, the creak of an old wooden wheelbarrow. Ethan raised his eyes and saw a familiar figure emerging from the misted path that connected their two cabins. Maya Ellis pushed the wheelbarrow awkwardly, struggling to maintain balance on the uneven ground. She was tall but slight, her figure wrapped in a faded cream sweater far too thin for the cool morning air. Her chestnut hair was gathered into a loose knot at the back of her head, strands escaping freely over her pale cheeks. She paused when she noticed Ethan on his porch and lifted a hand in a small wave, hesitant, polite. Ethan nodded in return. Social interaction wasn't his strength, but ignoring her would feel wrong after what he'd witnessed. "Morning," Maya called out softly. Her voice was gentle, carrying a tremor of fatigue that made Ethan straighten instinctively. He placed the mug aside and stepped down from the porch. Falcon followed, paws silent on the damp earth. "You're up early," Ethan said as he approached. Maya gave a weak smile. "Couldn't sleep, had some chores to finish before Noah wakes up." Her eyes, light hazel with flecks of gold that caught the morning light, displayed something deeper than exhaustion, a weight, a worry she hadn't spoken aloud. Ethan studied her carefully, noting the faint purplish shadows under her eyes, the slight tension in her shoulders. "Everything all right?" he asked. The question hung between them, heavy and purposeful. Maya hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the wooden handles of the wheelbarrow. I thought I saw someone near the tree line last night," she admitted quietly. "But maybe it was an animal, or my imagination." It wasn't her imagination. Ethan felt a sharp pull of anger toward the unseen men who had watched her. Anger he forced down before it hardened into something dangerous. "You should stay alert," he said carefully, "just in case." Maya nodded, though her smile faltered. "I try to. It's just, Noah sees me worry, and I don't want to frighten him." Ethan admired that. Most people wore their fear openly. She carried hers silently, trying to shield her child from it. Before he could say anything else, a door slammed in the distance. A small voice echoed after it. "Mama, Mama, wait for me!" Noah came bounding down the path, his red airplane clutched in one hand. The boy had sandy blonde hair sticking up in every direction, bright blue eyes full of life, and a smile wide enough to pull warmth from a stone. He was short for his age, round-faced, and full of energy. Falcon's ears twitched, his body relaxing. Noah sprinted toward them and skidded to a stop at Falcon's feet. "Hi, Falcon," he giggled. Falcon lowered his head respectfully, granting Noah permission to touch him. The boy scratched behind the dog's ears, and Falcon responded with a gentle tail wag. Ethan watched silently. Falcon, a dog trained to detect bombs, track insurgents, and guard lives with lethal precision, allowed himself to be disarmed only by innocence. Noah's presence always seemed to soften the animal's edges. Maya smiled at the interaction, but it quickly faded when heavy footfalls sounded from deeper in the woods. Ethan stiffened. Falcon's posture shifted instantly, alert, rigid, ready. 3 men emerged from the trees, their boots crunching on the gravel path. They looked out of place in the calm mountain morning, too sharp, too deliberate, too hungry. The leader of the trio stepped forward. He was tall, perhaps 6'1", with a thick neck and a broad barrel chest that strained against a charcoal work jacket. His hair was shaved close to the scalp, his jaw rough with uneven stubble, and an old scar cut diagonally across his cheek. His eyes, muddy brown and narrow, carried a swaggering brand of cruelty, the kind Ethan recognized instantly. This was a man who enjoyed being feared. His name, as Maya whispered under her breath, was Ian Merrick. Ethan did not know him, but he knew the type. A man used to getting what he wanted, usually by force. The second man was shorter, stockier, with a crooked nose and a tattoo snaking down his neck, an abstract design that looked almost tribal. He chewed gum loudly, jaw shifting with boredom. The third was lanky, jittery, with pale skin and nervous fingers that tapped rhythmically against his thigh. A follower, not a leader. Trouble, but not the source of it. Maya pulled Noah behind her immediately. Ian's lips twisted into a smirk. "Morning, Ms. Ellis," he said, tipping an imaginary hat. His voice was oily, confident. "We came by to finish our conversation from last week." Maya's face blanched. Ethan looked at her, noting her trembling hand. "Conversation?" Ethan asked. Ian's gaze snapped toward him, clearly not appreciating the interruption. "Who's this?" "A neighbor," Maya replied quickly. Too quickly. Ian assessed Ethan, his posture, his build, the quiet authority in his eyes. This wasn't a man to intimidate easily, and Ian didn't like that. "This isn't your business, neighbor," he spat. Ethan said nothing, but his silence alone was a warning. Ian stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Ms. Ellis, you've had plenty of time to think over the offer. That land of yours, it's valuable, and we need your signature today." Maya's breath shook. "I told you no." Ian's smile vanished. That wasn't a request. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. Legal pages clipped together, though Ethan doubted anything about them was lawful. He thrust it at her. "Sign it." Maya didn't take it. She stepped backward. Noah whimpered, clutching her sweater. Ian's nostrils flared. "Lady, don't make this difficult." He moved toward her aggressively. That was when Ethan stepped between them. "Back off," he said, voice low and controlled, the tone of a man who had given dangerous orders before. Ian's jaw twitched. "You want to rethink that?" "No," Ethan replied. Ian studied him with a predator's stillness, but something flickered. Unease. Maybe recognition of a threat he hadn't anticipated. "This isn't about you," Ian growled. "Walk away." Ethan didn't move. Falcon mirrored him, muscles coiled. The tattoos on the neck of the second man bulged as he leaned forward. "Just sign the damn papers," he snapped. Maya shook her head. Her voice broke. "This is my home." Ian lunged, not at Ethan, at Maya. His hand shot out, shoving her hard in the chest. She cried out as she hit the ground. Noah screamed, scrambling to help her. Something in Ethan snapped, quietly, completely. His vision narrowed, instincts taking command. His voice cut through the chaos with razor precision. "Guard!" Falcon launched forward like a missile. His powerful body slammed into the tattooed man, knocking him flat. The man shrieked as Falcon's weight drove the air from his lungs. Ian spun back toward Ethan in panic, but Ethan was already moving. He grabbed Ian by the front of his jacket, yanking him off balance. "You just made a mistake," Ethan warned. Ian's expression twisted with rage, but he didn't fight back. Falcon's snarl alone had frozen him. The lanky third man stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet. We need to go," he muttered. "Not like this. Not now." Ian hesitated, glaring at Maya as she clutched Noah to her chest. "This isn't over," he spat. "Especially for the kid." Ethan stepped into his path, eyes burning cold. "Try it," he said softly. That softness was worse than any threat. Ian's throat bobbed. He jerked his chin at his men. "Let's go." They retreated into the woods, muttering curses, dragging the injured tattooed man with them. Falcon remained in a defensive stance until Ethan signaled him to stand down. When they finally vanished, Ethan turned back to Maya. She sat trembling on the ground, one arm wrapped protectively around Noah, the other bracing herself as she struggled to steady her breathing. Her knees were scraped, her palms reddened. Noah sobbed quietly, burying his face against her. Ethan knelt beside them. "Are you hurt?" Maya shook her head, though tears streaked down her cheeks. "I'm okay," she whispered. "Just shaken." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightened. "Who are they?" "Men working for someone named Jonas Blackwell," Maya said, swallowing hard. "A developer. He wants my land. He said the lake bed under my property hides a natural inlet, a place that can be used for shipments. He wouldn't tell me what kind." Ethan's pulse throbbed at his temples. Shipments, inlets, surveillance, violence. This wasn't a land dispute. This was criminal infrastructure. Maya wiped her eyes. "I didn't want trouble. I just wanted a safe place for my son." Ethan glanced toward the woods, where the shadows swallowed the last traces of Ian's presence. "You're not safe anymore," he said quietly. Maya looked at him with desperation and exhaustion mingling in her expression. "What do I do?" Ethan stood. Falcon rose with him, a loyal, silent sentinel. "You're not alone," Ethan said after a long moment. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity. He wouldn't walk away. Not from this, not from them. The storm had reached Cedar Lake, and he was done pretending he couldn't feel its wind. Night settled over Cedar Lake with a heaviness that felt almost sentient, as though the darkness itself was watching from the treetops. A thin silver moon cut through the clouds, throwing jagged reflections across the water. Ethan Ward moved through the woods with silent precision, Falcon at his heel, both of them drawn by the pull of a threat still unspoken but undeniably present. The encounter that morning had only confirmed what Ethan already suspected. Ian Marek and his men were not acting alone. Their aggression, their desperation, their confidence, it all pointed to something larger behind them, a pressure bearing down from above. And Ethan intended to find out exactly who was applying that pressure. He followed a faint game trail leading toward the rocky ridge behind the Ellis property. The soil carried fresh impressions, boot prints, wide and heavy, deeper than those of casual hikers. Ethan paused, crouching low, fingers brushing the indentation. 3 men, he murmured. Same size as Marek's crew, but these aren't theirs. The spacing, the depth, the purposeful direction, they were too disciplined. These prints told a story. Coordinated movement, controlled breathing, synchronized pace, far too precise for hired muscle. Falcon sniffed the air, ears tilted forward, body taut. Ethan followed his gaze toward a cluster of boulders overlooking the lake. The moonlight illuminated faint scratch marks across the rock. Recent, deliberate, likely from metal. A scope or a weapon resting against stone. A vantage point. Someone had watched Maya's home from here last night, and they would be back. Ethan exhaled slowly, letting the cold air settle the battle-hard clarity in his mind. "We're dealing with professionals now," he whispered. Falcon responded with a low rumble deep in his chest. Ethan rose and started back toward his cabin. He needed answers, and he knew exactly who to call. Reed Dalton. The man he trusted with his life more times than he could count. The man who had once pulled him from a collapsed building in Kandahar with nothing but grit and a homemade jammer strapped to his chest. Reed wasn't just a communications specialist. He was a strategist, a coder, an electronic ghost who could break into systems protected by military-grade encryption. And more importantly, he was family. Ethan reached for his satellite phone and dialed. The call connected instantly. "Ward," came a voice thick with fatigue, but edged with sharp intelligence. Reed's tone carried the gravelly timbre of a man in his mid-30s who hadn't slept in 24 hours and preferred it that way. "You only call when the world is breaking, or about to." "This time it's both," Ethan replied. He explained the surveillance, the attack, the land dispute that reeked of organized criminal logistics. Reed didn't interrupt. He rarely did. Instead, he absorbed information silently, mind spinning at a speed faster than the words being spoken. "I'll be there in 4 hours," Reed said, no hesitation. "Bring gear," Ethan added. "All of it." "Already packed," Reed said. "Dalton out." Ethan hung up. Relief flickered briefly in his chest before fading into steel resolve. Reed Dalton would come, and when he did, the game would change. Reed arrived just after midnight. The forest hummed with crickets, the lake reflecting the faint glow of headlights weaving up the dirt road. Ethan stepped forward as a black SUV rolled to a slow halt. The door opened, revealing a tall, lean man with tightly coiled muscle and quick, calculating eyes. Reed Dalton stood 6 feet even, his posture straight and exact, like someone still half living by military cadence. His hair was sandy brown, kept short, but long enough to fall slightly across his forehead when he was deep in thought. A faint scar traced the line of his jaw, a remnant of a blast wave he'd survived during an intelligence extraction mission. Reed's skin carried the pallor of someone who spent more time behind screens than under the sun, and his hands bore small marks, tiny burns from soldering microchips, faint cuts from rewiring tools. "Ward," Reed said. His voice was cool, measured, but there was an unspoken warmth beneath it. "Dalton," Ethan replied. They clasped hands, a brief shake infused with years of trust and shared battles. Falcon trotted up, tail wagging once in recognition. Reed crouched, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Still terrifying, huh?" Falcon grunted approvingly. Reed straightened. "Show me." Ethan led him inside the cabin. Reed had brought enough equipment to outfit a covert ops team. Thermal cameras, motion sensors the size of marbles, 2 foldable drones, a compact radar unit, and a portable command console. "Tell me about the woman," Reed said while assembling the console. Ethan paused slightly. "Maya Ellis, early 30s, widow, quiet, resilient, working to raise her son alone." Reed looked up, eyebrows arching. "You care." "She's in danger," Ethan replied, without emotion. "That's enough." Reed respected that answer. He always had. "And what about the kid?" "Noah, 6, bright, brave, attached to Falcon." Reed smiled faintly. "Smart kid." They began placing sensors around the cabin. Reed's movements were efficient, methodical, guided by an intuition sharpened by a decade of remote surveillance missions. "This threat," Reed said, while securing a motion beacon under the porch railing. "It isn't just muscle. The prints you described, the vantage marks, they're scouting teams." "For who?" Ethan asked. Reed wiped dirt from his hands. "You mentioned a name earlier, Jonas Blackwell." Ethan nodded grimly. They had both heard the name. Blackwell was a businessman in appearance only, a tall, sharp-featured man in his mid-40s who funded tech companies, logistics operations, and off-the-books trading networks. Riley hair swept neatly back, dark suits tailored to perfection, the smile of a preacher but the soul of a shark. Blackwell's eyes, cold, calculating green, were the eyes of a man who had never known consequence. "Blackwell uses companies as fronts," Reed explained. "Shipping, manufacturing, distribution, legal on the surface, but beneath it all, smuggling tech, weapon components, encrypted drives, microchips banned from international export." Ethan clenched his jaw. "And he wants to use the lake." "He wants the inlet," Reed corrected. "Your message mentioned a natural underwater channel. If that's true, it's exactly the kind of infrastructure a man like Blackwell pays millions to control." Ethan felt the weight of it settle into his bones. Maya had no idea her land sat on the edge of a criminal artery. Noah had no idea men in the forest already watched him like a pawn on a board they believed they owned. And that didn't sit well with Ethan, not in the slightest. It took Reed nearly 2 hours to install the perimeter system. By 3 a.m., the forest around the Ellis cabin was laced with invisible, watchful eyes. Thermals hidden under rocks, motion sensors strapped to trunks, micro cameras wedged beneath branches. Falcon patrolled alongside them, guiding Reed away from predator dens and unstable ground, proving once again why he had survived missions many dogs hadn't. Back at Ethan's cabin, Reed activated the command console. Streams of live data filled the screen. Heat signatures, wildlife movement, atmospheric readings. Then something changed. An alert blinked red, then a second, then 3. Reed leaned forward, fingers flying over controls. "Movement," he said sharply. "North quadrant." Ethan stepped closer. A cluster of human-shaped heat signatures appeared on the thermal map, 8 in total, moving with a fluid precision that made even Ethan's skin crawl. They kept low, stayed in formation, and held to natural blind spots. "These aren't Merrick's thugs," Reed muttered. "No," Ethan agreed. "They're trained." More signatures appeared, 2 to the west, another 3 circling wide. A coordinated net tightening around Maya's home. Ethan's pulse slowed, not in fear, but in a dangerous stillness, a soldier's calm before action. Falcon growled, the sound low and primal. "They're surrounding the property," Reed said, "watching windows, doors, escape paths. They're building a pattern of life." Ethan knew the term well. Pattern of life, tracking routines, vulnerabilities, habits. The first stage of an abduction, assault, or cleanup. "What do they want?" Reed asked. Ethan's voice was ice. "Whatever Blackwell is smuggling, Maya's land is in the way." Reed exhaled sharply. "We need to tell her." "We will," Ethan said, "but not tonight." He grabbed his jacket and rifle from the table. "Tonight, we watch them back." Reed opened his mouth, but Ethan lifted a hand. "They don't expect resistance. That gives us an advantage." Reed nodded reluctantly. He understood Ethan's thinking. He just didn't like it. Ethan and Falcon moved through the woods like shadows. They kept downwind, staying silent, letting the moonlight guide their steps. Ethan spotted the first man crouched behind a fallen log. He was lean but muscular, maybe mid-30s, dressed in matte black tactical gear. His hair was buzzed short except for a thin scar slicing above his temple. His eyes were sharp, unblinking. Eyes belonged to a soldier shaped by dark missions. This wasn't a hired gun. This was someone trained, disciplined, and paid well. Ethan signaled Falcon to stay low. He studied the man's equipment: long-range monocular, suppressed sidearm, encrypted radio clipped to his vest. Then another figure appeared 10 meters to the right, a woman this time. She was tall, maybe 5'10", with black braided hair tucked into a tight bun. Her skin was deep bronze, smooth but hardened by exposure to harsh climates. She wore gear identical to the first operator, her movements crisp, controlled, almost surgical. Ethan could see the tension in her jaw. A professional, not a thrill seeker. Not a criminal by desire, but by employment. These weren't locals. These weren't Merrick's men. These weren't amateurs. "These are recon specialists," Ethan whispered. "Blackwell hired them to scout before he escalates." Falcon stayed rigid, barely breathing. Ethan backed away slowly, careful not to trigger any alerts. Tonight wasn't the night for confrontation. Tonight was the night for understanding the shape of the beast they were facing. By dawn, the operators had withdrawn, silent, efficient, disappearing into the forest like ghosts. Ethan returned to the cabin where Reed waited, eyes red from watching screens. "They're professionals," Ethan said. "Not militia, not smugglers, trained recon." Reed nodded grimly. "I ran a trace on Blackwell's financial shell companies." He turned the laptop toward Ethan. "Blackwell recently hired a private security firm, the kind that recruits ex-military specializing in acquisition operations." Ethan sat heavily. The truth crystallized. Blackwell wasn't acquiring land. He was acquiring secrecy. And Maya Ellis, an ordinary widow trying to protect her son, stood directly in the way of an international smuggling route. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. He felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, heavier than any pack he'd ever carried. He had left the Navy hoping to escape war's relentless pull, but some storms didn't ask permission before they came. Falcon rested his head against Ethan's knee, offering silent comfort. Ethan exhaled. "All right," he said softly, steel forming in his voice. "Then we prepare." The shadows in the forest had spoken their warning, and Ethan Ward had heard them. A battle was coming. One Cedar Lake wasn't ready for, but he was. The storm reached Cedar Lake with a violence that felt almost personal, as if the sky itself had chosen this night to split open and unleash everything it had ever held back. Sheets of rain hammered the earth, and wind slashed through the pines with a wolfish howl, but Ethan Ward moved through the chaos with steady, silent purpose. Storms did not rattle him. They sharpened him. They reminded him of who he was. And tonight, he needed that reminder. The operators who had scouted Maya's land the previous night were nowhere to be seen now. But that absence only tightened the coil inside Ethan's chest. Quiet enemies were always worse than loud ones. Falcon paced beside him, body low, fur soaked, amber eyes slicing through the dark. Ethan crouched next to the dog. "Stay sharp," he said. Falcon's breathing deepened in acknowledgement. Behind them, inside Ethan's cabin, Reed Dalton monitored the storm from his console. The screens glowed blue and red under his fingers, each flicker a pulse of danger. Reed had stripped off his jacket, revealing a lean frame wrapped in a black tactical shirt, sleeves pushed to his elbows. Despite the chill, a faint sheen of sweat coated his forehead. He wasn't afraid, but he was calculating. "Ethan," Reed called out, voice taut as he scanned the thermal feeds. "We've got movement." Ethan stepped inside, rainwater dripping from his jacket. "How many?" "9, maybe 10, Reed replied, adjusting the imaging. "They're splitting. One group moving toward the Ellis place from the east, the others circling toward us." Ethan's jaw hardened. "Blackwell's making his move." "He's not waiting anymore," Reed said. "He wants the land tonight." Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the cabin in a flash of white. Thunder shook the windows. Ethan felt the familiar anchoring calm take over. Battle clarity. "We go to Maya now," he ordered, grabbing his gear. "I already pinged her radio," Reed said. "She's waking Noah and heading to the cellar. But Ethan," Reed paused, swallowing. "They're fast. They'll reach her in minutes." Ethan slung his rifle across his back and gave a sharp command. "Falcon, close." The dog snapped into position, and they ran. The forest had become a battlefield sculpted by stormlight. Mud sucked at Ethan's boots, branches whipped against his arms, and thunder drowned out nearly everything except the sound he tracked more than any other: Falcon's steady breath behind him. The Ellis cabin came into view through sheets of rain. Maya stood at the doorway, hair plastered to her cheeks, clothes soaked through. She looked terrified, but she wasn't running. She was waiting for him. "Ethan," she cried, voice trembling. "They're coming. They're already in the trees." Ethan grabbed her shoulders gently but firmly. "Get to the cellar, now. Don't stop. Don't look back." Maya nodded, eyes wide. Noah clung too, her leg, his little body shaking. Falcon brushed against the boy, offering reassurance in the way only he could. "Go," Ethan repeated. Maya rushed inside, pulling Noah with her. Falcon followed her to the threshold, then looked back at Ethan. "Stay with them," Ethan commanded. Falcon obeyed instantly, disappearing inside to guard the two people Ethan was willing to give everything for. The door closed, and Ethan locked it from the outside. He could hear the metal bolts sliding into place, a sound that felt like both a promise and a prayer. Then the forest erupted. 3 mercenaries burst from the trees, dressed in matte black tactical gear soaked with rain and streaks of mud. These men were trained differently from Merrick's thugs. They moved with calculated precision, each step placed to maintain silent momentum, even in unstable terrain. The one in front raised his arm in a signal. He was tall, muscular, maybe late 30s, with a thick black beard trimmed to a sharp angle along his jaw. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, predatory, emotionless, the kind of eyes forged by repeated violence. Ethan recognized that look from men he had served beside, men who had lost too much to feel anything anymore. The bearded man's name, Ethan later learned, was Cole Varick, former ranger, dishonorably discharged for excessive use of force during a civilian raid. Cole spotted Ethan, his lips curled into a smirk that didn't belong in any human expression of satisfaction. It was too sharp, too hungry. "Get him," Cole ordered. Two men flanked right and left. Ethan didn't wait. He moved first. He grabbed the floodlight rig Reed had helped him set up earlier that day, slamming the switch. A beam of blinding white light tore across the clearing, slicing through rain and shadows. The mercenaries staggered, swearing as their night vision overloaded. Ethan lunged toward the nearest one, driving his elbow into the man's throat, then sweeping his leg out from under him. The man hit the mud with a choked gasp. Cole raised a rifle, but Reed's radio jammer roared to life, sending a screaming pulse through every communication device within 50 yards. Cole cursed as his headset crackled violently, forcing him to rip it off. "What the hell?" Another mercenary fired blindly into the light, bullets slicing into the wet ground just feet from Ethan. Reed shouted from the tree line, "They're trying to pin you! Move left!" Ethan pivoted, rolled, and snatched a flash emitter from his vest. He slammed it into the mud and activated it. A burst of strobing white mixed with high-pitched frequency pulses detonated in the clearing. The mercenaries groaned, disoriented. Ethan sprinted toward the second group approaching from the west. They were closing in on the cellar. He could not let them reach Maya. He could not let them take Noah. Falcon would defend them with his life. But Falcon was one dog. Ethan was the bridge between the boy and the violence that wanted to swallow him whole. Rain pounded down harder. A mercenary leapt from behind a tree, swinging a knife. Ethan blocked with his forearm, twisted, and drove a knee into the man's ribs. The knife fell. Ethan shoved him into a trunk with enough force to knock him unconscious. Then he heard it, a scream. Maya's scream. Ethan spun toward the cellar just as a mercenary reached the door. He was enormous, 6'4", shoulders like boulders. A shaved head glistened with rain, and his tattoos covered both arms in jagged, blackened geometric patterns. His name was Orrin Tate. He gripped the cellar handle and pulled. The metal groaned under the force. Falcon exploded from the crack at the bottom of the cellar door. He hit Tate like a thunderbolt, jaws locking onto the man's forearm. Tate howled, stumbling backward. Falcon held on, teeth sinking deeper as the mercenary tried to shake him off. Ethan sprinted forward, slamming his shoulder into Tate's chest. The man fell, splashing into the mud with a grunt. Falcon released and bounded back to the cellar door, standing guard again. Tate reached for a sidearm, but Ethan kicked it away, then hit him across the jaw with the butt of his rifle, dropping him cold. Lightning split the sky. Thunder roared. From the corner of his eye, Ethan saw Cole Varick approaching. Alone now. Rain streaked down his beard, glistening like oil in the stormlight. "You fight well," Cole said, raising his weapon. "Shame you're on the wrong side of this." Ethan glared at him. "There's only one side when a kid is involved." Cole shrugged. "Then you'll die for someone else's problem." He lifted his rifle. A shot rang through the storm, but not from Cole's gun. Cole jerked, weapon slipping in his grip. Reed Dalton stepped from behind a tree, soaked to the bone, holding a compact, non-lethal pulse rifle. The shot had hit Cole square in the chest, hard enough to knock him backward into the mud, muscles convulsing from the electric charge. "You okay?" Reed asked, chest heaving. Ethan nodded. "You?" "I hate the rain," Reed muttered, "and I hate gunmen in the rain even more." Ethan allowed himself one brief, sharp exhale that almost resembled a laugh. Almost. Then the forest went quiet. Too quiet. The mercenaries were down. Cole was unconscious. The cellar was safe. Falcon was unharmed. But the storm had not ended. Neither the one in the sky nor the one Ethan felt in his gut. Because men like Cole did not act without orders. And the man giving those orders had not shown himself. Jonas Blackwell was still out there. Ethan lifted his eyes toward the dark ridgeline. Somewhere beyond the tree line, beyond the storm, beyond the night, Blackwell was waiting for his next move, and men who waited tended to strike harder. Ethan felt the truth settle cold inside him. Tonight they survived. But survival wasn't victory, not yet. The wind howled through the forest, carrying a warning. Blackwell would return, and next time he wouldn't send mercenaries. He would come himself, and he would bring hell with him. Dawn had not yet broken, but a faint silver haze clung to the treetops, the kind that appears only after a long night of violence. The storm had quieted at last, though the forest still held its breath as if waiting for something final, something inevitable. Ethan Ward stood beside the Ellis cabin, soaked, bruised, and streaked with mud, yet alert as ever. The air smelled of rain and pine sap and burnt ozone from Reed's pulse rifle. Falcon leaned against his leg, chest rising and falling with controlled breaths, ears pricked for danger. Ethan swept his gaze across the clearing. The mercenaries had been secured. Cole Varick still lay unconscious, zip-tied near a fallen log. Maya and Noah were safely inside the cabin now, shaken but unharmed. And Reed, tired, jittery, but fiercely focused, stood by the thermal monitor, eyes scanning every flicker. He pushed his glasses up his nose, a gesture nearly lost in the dirt smeared along his cheek. "Ethan," Reed whispered, "I picked up something big." Ethan's chest tightened, not fear, but readiness. Falcon sensed the shift and rose, hackles stiffening. "What is it?" "Rotor signature," Reed answered. "Small helicopter, coming in fast, no transponder." The words hit Ethan like a cold wave. Blackwell, the man who had orchestrated everything, the man who treated human lives as obstacles and property as currency. And now he was coming here, personally. Ethan stepped closer to Reed's screen. A red dot pulsed over a topographical map of the Ellis property. The flight path wasn't subtle. It aimed directly for the clearing behind the house. "He's not sending men this time," Ethan said quietly. "He's coming to end it himself." The helicopter's distant chop rolled through the forest like an approaching storm. Ethan turned to Falcon. The dog met his eyes with the steadiness of a soldier. "Stay close," Ethan murmured, "but wait for my word." Falcon lowered his head, muscles coiled. Ethan moved toward the cabin door, but Maya opened it first. Her dark hair was tangled from the storm, her shirt torn at the sleeve, her skin still pale from the attack, yet there was something unbroken in her gaze. "Ethan," she whispered, clutching the frame for support. "Is it over?" He shook his head. "Not yet." She pressed a hand to her chest. "Noah's inside. He's sleeping finally, but do I need to take him back into the cellar? Ethan hesitated. He wanted to say yes, to hide her and the boy beneath layers of earth and steel until the world stopped trying to crush them. But helicopters were different. Noise would terrify Noah, and Blackwell wanted leverage. Opportunities for leverage had to be eliminated. "Stay inside," Ethan said firmly. "Keep Noah behind you. Falcon will protect you until I signal otherwise." Maya stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Ethan, whatever happens, please come back." The words hit something in him he wasn't prepared for, but he nodded once. "I will." The helicopter descended. Its searchlight cut through the trees like a blade. Wind blasted the clearing, flattening grass and sending debris swirling. Ethan and Reed took cover behind the woodpile near the rear clearing, while Falcon slipped into the shadows, belly low, ears tracking every shift in the air. The aircraft touched down with a harsh metal groan. The engine idled, blades still cutting the wind. From the side door stepped Jonas Blackwell. He looked nothing like the men he hired. He didn't need to. Evil rarely dressed like its soldiers. Blackwell was tall, lean, and sharply tailored in a charcoal suit that somehow seemed unbothered by the rotor wash. His black hair was combed back perfectly, not a strand out of place, and his tan skin glowed with the slight sheen of someone who lived in luxury, not danger. But the most striking thing about him was his smile. Calm, poised, utterly detached. A man who believed the world belonged to him. He walked forward with confident strides, boots crunching over wet branches. Then he pulled out a gun, and with casual grace, he grabbed Maya from behind. Ethan's breath stopped. Maya gasped, her body tensing against Blackwell's grip. The barrel pressed hard against her temple. Ethan froze, heart pounding, world narrowing to a single point. Noah, still inside the cabin, began to cry. "Ethan!" Maya choked, reaching out with her free hand. Blackwell's grip tightened. Ah, he purred, voice smooth as venom. "Move an inch, Ward, and this ends very quickly." Ethan raised his empty hands slowly, palms forward. His voice was steady, but his blood surged with suppressed violence. "Let her go," Blackwell chuckled. "Do you know how much trouble you've caused me? Do you understand the investment at stake here? That land," he jerked Maya slightly, "is the key to my entire coastal operation." Ethan held his ground. "You're done, Blackwell. Your men are down, Cole is down, and Reed already contacted federal authorities." Blackwell's eyes flicked to Reed, then back to Ethan. "Federal authorities?" he repeated with mocking amusement. "You think I'm afraid of them? They work for people like me." His thumb brushed the trigger. "Let's negotiate, Ethan Ward. You surrender, and I may consider leaving the woman alive." Maya flinched. Ethan's mind raced. He assessed angles, distance, timing. But Falcon was moving. The dog had slipped through the brush behind Blackwell, silent as a shadow. Ethan needed one thing, a distraction, one breath, one heartbeat where Blackwell's eyes shifted. He inhaled through his nose and exhaled slowly. "Blackwell," he said calmly, "you made one mistake." "Oh?" Blackwell sneered. "And what's that?" Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper only Falcon could hear. "Eyes on," Falcon launched. It happened faster than breath, faster than thought. Falcon burst from the shadows, jaws clamping onto Blackwell's forearm with explosive force. Blackwell screamed, his grip on the gun faltering as Maya shoved backward, stumbling free. Ethan moved. He surged forward with ruthless precision, kicking the gun from Blackwell's hand, grabbing him by the wrist, twisting sharply until bone cracked. Blackwell collapsed, gasping, mud splashing across his suit. "Get him!" he shrieked. But his helicopter pilot, lean, pale, mid-40s with a nervous tic under one eye, was already raising his hands, surrendering before the fight began. Ethan shoved Blackwell into the ground, knee pressed between his shoulder blades, securing him in a hold that brooked no mercy. Falcon released his grip, stepping back with a low, dominant growl vibrating in his chest. Maya backed away, trembling, hand to her mouth. Reed approached cautiously, pulse rifle raised. "Is it over?" Ethan breathed hard. "Not yet." And then the night filled with sound. A second helicopter thundered overhead, larger, heavier, equipped with floodlights and bearing the emblem of the Federal Tactical Response Bureau. 3 more followed, federal agents fast-roped down in black gear, shouting commands. Reed exhaled shakily. "Told you they'd come." Floodlights lit the clearing. Agents swarmed the mercenaries, securing Cole, taking Blackwell from Ethan's grip, and dispersing through the woods to gather every remaining operator. Maya stood frozen until one agent gently guided her back toward the house. Ethan followed close behind. Noah ran out the moment he saw his mother, eyes filled with tears. "Mama!" Maya fell to her knees, wrapping him in her arms. She cried quietly, burying her face in his hair. Ethan stopped a few feet away, letting them have the moment. Something in his chest loosened, something that had been clenched for years, maybe forever. Falcon pressed against Ethan's leg. Ethan knelt and rested a hand on the dog's neck. "You did good," he whispered. Falcon huffed softly, eyes warm, as if he understood the layers beneath Ethan's words. A federal officer approached. She was tall, about 50, with dark brown skin, short silver-streaked hair, and a tone that commanded respect without raising her voice. "Your Ward?" he nodded. "Ethan Ward." "Agent Mara Kingston," she introduced, offering a firm handshake. Her posture was straight, precise, military in origin, though she wore no visible branch insignia. "Your friend Dalton gave us everything we needed. We've been tracking Blackwell for years. Thanks to you, this operation is dismantled." Ethan accepted the handshake silently. Gratitude wasn't something he absorbed easily. Mara continued, "If you ever decide to come back to federal service, consider contacting me. Men like you don't appear twice." Ethan gave a faint, wry smile. "I think I've had my fill of missions." Mara nodded knowingly. "Sometimes walking away is the hardest part." She left him with that. Ethan walked toward Maya and Noah. Maya rose slowly, eyes shining with relief. For the first time, she didn't seem afraid. She stepped toward Ethan, voice trembling. "You saved us." Ethan shook his head. "You saved yourselves. I just made sure you got the chance." She reached for his hand, hesitant, gentle, hopeful. Noah stepped closer too, clutching Falcon's fur. The sun finally crested the horizon, sending gold light through the pines. After everything, the fear, the fight, the storm, Ethan felt a sensation he barely recognized. Peace, not loud, not triumphant, quiet, earned. Falcon sat beside him, tail thumping once against the earth, as if sealing something sacred between them all. Cedar Lake would heal, Maya and Noah would be safe. And Ethan had found something he didn't know he still had, a place where the war inside him could rest. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder or blinding light. Sometimes they come quietly, through the courage of a man who refuses to look away, the loyalty of a dog who stands between innocence and danger, or the strength of a mother who keeps fighting even when the world feels impossibly dark. What happened at Cedar Lake reminds us of a truth we often forget. Light doesn't always defeat the storm, but it always survives it. And in our everyday lives, we face storms too. Fear, loneliness, sickness, financial struggles, heartbreak. Each one can feel like an enemy pressing in from every side. But just like Ethan, Maya, and little Noah discovered, help often appears in ways we don't expect. Sometimes through a friend, sometimes through a stranger, sometimes through a moment of unexpected strength rising inside us, and sometimes through the quiet grace of God. If this story touched your heart, if it made you believe just a little more in hope, in goodness, in protection that comes when we need it most, then you already carry a miracle within you. May God bless you, protect your family, guide your steps, and give you the strength to overcome every battle you face. You are not alone. You are never alone. If you believe in the power of courage and kindness, please share this story, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel so these messages of hope can reach more people who need them. And before you go, write Amen in the comments below, as a blessing, as a prayer, and as a reminder that light will always return after the storm. If you'd like, I can also create a video closing narration, a prayer-only version, or a shorter emotional ending.